In today's video, we're going to paint a really simple flower with Inktense pencils. Now, I recently did another video that was an introduction to Inktense pencils and another one after that, which was all about techniques. If you didn't see those videos, I'll link them in the description of this video so you can watch them later if you would like to. But today we're going to do a really simple flower. So this can be your first project as a beginner. If you're a more experienced artist, you'll still enjoy it. It can be like a palette cleanser for you. And before you all ask me in the comments, yes, you can use watercolor pencils instead if you would like to. So I'm going to take you through every single stage and let's get started. For our subject today, I found this lovely daisy flower. This is from one of the copyright-free websites. I'll pop it in my Facebook group in the files. I'll leave details of how you can find that in the description of this video. So you can download the same picture and have a go if you want. I did crop it a little bit. It had more leaves and things down below, so I cropped this version in. And we're going to start by making a drawing. Now, I'm not going to use a standard graphite pencil for this because it's really important wherever possible to draw in the medium that you will be working in. That way, any of your lines will just blend in. I do, for reasons I won't go into in this video, I do prefer a graphite pencil for standard watercolor paints, but I'm going to use an Inktense pencil for this. Now, I don't have a full set of colors, but I have a couple of purples and I've chosen this lighter one here. It's actually called Fuchsia. We'll check in a minute and see how pink it goes because there are elements of pink in this picture, but I want to start with the drawing. The first thing that we want to do is really look at the proportions. So I'm going to measure height here versus width, and we see that it is wider than it is high, and that's because we're looking across it, so we've got some foreshortening going on. And the first thing I'm going to do is just fix a place for it to sit on my paper. So I'm going to say that I don't want it to come wider than here and here on each side of my paper, and that enables me then to fit it into this space. So if we then take, a rough center line here, and we'll figure out roughly where the halfway point is. You could measure with a ruler if you want to. I'm not going to bother. And then what we need to do is make sure that it's less high than it is wide. So again, let's see how many times it fits in. So there, a little bit less than 1.5. So let's try about here to start with. I also want at this point to find the center point. So the center point of the center here won't be necessarily in the middle. It's going to be a little bit closer to the top. And although it doesn't appear to have, an exact center, we can see by these little lumps, they get smaller as they go here. So I would say the center is about here. It seems to be evenly spaced between here and here, but it is higher up. So let's mark that in. So we'll get a rough idea of shape, and we'll have the center up here. This petal here is a little bit longer than the ones at the top, although there are some shorter ones here as well. So we're just going to give that a little bit extra space down there, keep this a little bit shorter, and we're starting to get an idea of the width and where the middle is. What I'll do now is start to look at the outside shape. Now, although I'm not going to put a specific background in, I am going to drop some background colour in. That means that we're safe to take a little bit of a very pale sketching line across here because it'll be dissipated by that background colour. And what I'm going to do now is use the envelope technique, and that is the idea of getting kind of an idea of what a square-sided shape would look like if it were drawn around the outside edge of our petals. This now gives us a fantastic shape to work within. I'm going to get a yellow pencil and just be a little bit more precise about the shape of this center here, keeping it really very light indeed. And I feel like it's much flatter at the base and wider at the sides here. I'm also going to sketch in just a hint of a stem down there. Yellow is part of green, so we're fairly safe to take this color in here. What I'm going to do now is go back to my lilac pencil and start, or fuchsia as they call it, and start to sketch in the petals. So I'll look at a particular petal and put it roughly where it goes. I'm not going to check that, I've got 23 petals or however many. I'm just going to start getting some nice petal shapes there, and I'll fill in any gaps that are a bit too big or uncomfortable. It's really important these petals are different lengths. For instance, we have one down here that's really quite short, so we'll get that one in a little bit smaller. And you notice how they all come from this center point, and they come sort of within a little bit here. I'm going to work round now and draw the outline of these petals. It's more important that you keep them fairly clean than you keep sketching and sketching and sketching, because if we have too many wrong lines, we won't be able to get rid of them too much. So just pick some petals, pop them in the right place, keeping this outside shape as your rough guideline for how big your petals get. You can go outside it or inside it a little bit, but don't stray too much so that we keep that shape where it is wider than it is tall. So you can see I'm working around my flower, keeping an eye on the petal shapes, popping them into this envelope shape. Once I've got all the way round, then we're going to be looking at putting in a little bit of background colour, because some of the edges of these petals are pure white, and once everything's blended together, we may not see them against white paper. Certainly you could do this just on white paper if it's easier for you, but I'm going to show you a really easy way of dropping in a light background. So let's get on and swatch some colours. So this fuchsia colour I'm using looks perfect. We also need a colour for the centre. Now I'm currently filming another tutorial at the same time as this, which is going to be for my online watercolor pencil and Inktense course. So that one will be coming up late spring 2025, and I'm actually doing a Satsuma as one of the modules, and I've been using this color here, and although it looks orange, I know that it's actually quite yellow. So I think that's, that's a nice color for the center here, maybe a little bright in places. We can also perhaps use some of this yellow here. Now yellow and purple are opposite colours, and if we mix together we should get somewhat of a neutral, but it's coming out quite warm because this is a very pinky colour. So I'm thinking of adding a tiny touch of a darker purple. So I've got this deep violet. Let's see how this one looks when we mix it with our mango colour. Very nice, because we're going to need some areas of shadow, and we don't want to use something harsh like a grey or a black, so we can use this colour. We do also need some green. Let's look at this one here, and I will list all of the colours I'm using in the description of this video. I'm also going to write them down on the side of my paper, and I think actually that will make a really nice background colour. I don't want to go too dark, so we'll probably mix some of the yellow in as well. Now, because I want to get a soft vignette effect on the background, I don't necessarily want any texture there. There'll be plenty of texture in the flower. I'm going to use this special palette. Now, don't panic if you don't have one of these. I have some easy alternatives for you. You can simply scribble on a piece of watercolor paper. Some people use like a plastic kitchen chopping board. Of course, don't use the same one you use for your food. Also, I found that things like plastic Tupperware lids often have, you just want plastic that's got a little bit of texture to it, or a paper that's got a little bit of texture to it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to scribble both my leaf green here and my sun yellow here. I'm going to dissolve these colours, and I have two water jars next to me because I want one for clean water with a larger brush, and then one that I can rinse this smaller paintbrush in. I also have some paper towel nearby if I end up with too much of this colour on my brush. I'm going to mix up a little more and then we'll get started. So I want to get a softly fading out effect. I'm going to start on one side of the stem and work round. So what I'll need to do is add some clean water. Basically, I'm adding an outline of clean water here and then taking the Inktense up to it. Go out a lot further than you think you need to, almost to the edge of the paper. And then what we're going to do is just come in like this. As this colour hits the water, it will become softened and blended. We can take some of the yellow in as well and get a bit of variation. Now, the reason I haven't taken the water around the whole flower, I'm going to go round in stages, is because it'll dry out before I get to it, and we want to keep this edge wet. So we're going to come round like this, keeping that nice softness there. Try not to go back. It's not the end of the world if you get a drying line, particularly if you are a beginner. Please don't let it worry you too much. I'm going to work all the way around the outside edge. Try to go darker where you're touching those white petals, and we can use the brush to agitate those construction lines. You can see I've got a few little bits here that haven't fully dissolved. I'm not really going to worry too much about those. One final thing I'm going to do is fill in any little sort of islands of background that haven't been grabbed as we were on the outside. And remember to sort of keep this line here jagged so that it'll naturally sit behind that center. Now, if you feel you've messed the background up, the best thing to do is allow it to dry and then repeat the process. Just go on top. You must let it dry first though. Beginners often make the mistake of going into areas that are damp and it just gets worse and worse. So let it dry. It hasn't gone dark enough, or if there are some uncomfortable lines, got these areas here, you might want to redissolve little bits of it. Let it dry and then just take the water around again. But remember to go outside in so that you're not spreading any pigment further out. The manufacturers will tell you that Inktense does not re-wet once it's dry. I have found this to be entirely untrue. Controversial. There we are. So I'm fairly happy with that. I'm going to let it dry and then I'm going to work on my flower. Now, I was umming and ahhing about whether to do the petals next or the center next, and honestly you really could do it either way, but I'm going to start, I think, by doing the center part. And what I want to do is get an idea of the outside shape here. Not putting any marks in the middle just yet because they'll just dissolve, and I'm going to get these outside shapes, some of which kind of have little bits that come up like this. Once I've done that, what I'll do is I'll do some light shading across this whole area with this mango color, and then we're going to wet this area and start putting the detail in whilst it's wet. So as well as sketching with some of the mango colour, I've also added some yellow around, sort of in a ring around here. And I fetched my pencil sharpener in, so I've sharpened my green and my purple, and so we can add some details with that. It's really important at this point as well that you change your water and that you're not working with some sort of nasty green water. And if you come across any areas where you have a little bit of those initial sketch lines, you can just agitate a little bit with your brush. So just coming around the outside here, these bumpy shapes. Now, if we draw into this wet paint, we'll get quite a lot of pigment release. So that's what we're going to do in a moment when I've got around here. Now, you can use a little bit of green, particularly around this lower edge. There are some green areas. So we can come in like this. We can also use the mango to get more circular shapes. This works really well. Remember to make them smaller as you get into the center. You can even in places use just the tiniest amount of the violet. I can use my brush if I want to disperse these, but be careful, don't take your brush right the way across, or you're just going to get a load of mud in the middle. I'm going to continue working on this area here. Around the outside, I can take some of that green and get some of those little leaf shapes perhaps. I might even, just for fun, bring in a little bit of this brighter green. Before we continue with the rest of our tutorial, very quickly, I just wanted to ask you, did you know how few channels on YouTube are cat approved? Now, my channel is fully cat approved, and it's really hard to get the approval of cats because we all know how fussy they are. So if you could like, share, leave me a comment or free subscribe, I would be so grateful. So don't overwork your flower center. We might put a few finishing touches on at the end, but for now I'm happy with that. I'm going to start working on the flower petals. It's important to maintain some white, and what I'm going to do is just start shading where I see some color. We'll use the brush as well to tidy up any edges that we're not happy with. Again, make sure your water is clean. Start on the white part of the petal and work towards the colour. If you do it the other way round, all that's going to happen is you're going to end up with fuchsia coloured petals with no white on whatsoever. So I'm going to come round like this, sharpening up those edges if I need to. Don't worry about fully dissolving the pencil because these petals do have lines on. We can clean up outside edges where we need to, but try not to end up with petals that look outlined. We've got background here that will show our petals up nicely. So if you've already got a nice clean edge, I wouldn't mess with it. Now, occasionally in places, if you need a little bit more shadow, you can drop a tiny bit of the dark purple in, but you want to be quite sparing with that. Otherwise you just end up changing the color of the petal. You see that on this top one here, I've actually got some yellow there from the underdrawing, but it really doesn't matter. We'll just blend it all in. I'm working on individual separate petals rather than working on ones that are touching each other, moving around the flower. This stops me from leaning in wet paint. It also stops one petal bleeding into another. So we have one or two petals that are fully pink. They haven't got much white on, so you can sketch across the whole thing. But you'll notice I still don't put a lot of pencil on because this colour is quite strongly pigmented and it would go too dark. So we can come in like this. And then if there are any darker areas within that, any darker lines, we can come straight in with the violet. And I'll allow this petal to dry before working on the ones next to it. Some of the others have a lot more white on. Let's look at one like this one over here. But you still need a little bit of dark to show up the petal next to it. And if you're trying to decide which petal the darker should go on, always the one that's behind. So again, I'm starting on the white area and coming down, agitating that colour without going dark across the whole petal. So I've mostly finished painting my petals, and don't forget you can always take a damp brush in and, you know, smooth things a little more, but try not to make everything go really dark so you don't have any white left on display. Notice as well that I've actually been going in with various shades, my 2 shades of green and also some purple and the mango color as well, to get a little bit of definition. You especially want it around these areas here, around the edges, and anywhere that sort of comes up into a petal. Again, be careful with these dark colours. Sort of take your brush towards them, not up and out. And in that way, you'll stop all of those darks spreading too far up. You just want to get these darks around the edge and somewhat in the middle here. But again, be careful. Don't put too much water on because all you'll do is just make everything a nasty, muddy colour instead of getting a few dark shadows. The last thing for me to do is to work on the stem. So I'm going to do this really simply. I'm going to go in with my bright green here. I'm going to take it a little bit further down like this. And we'll just get a little bit as well of darker shadow underneath that petal and perhaps down one side. To keep this idea of things fading in, I'll come up from the outside edge. So we sort of fade into the green here. And I've used a different green. I've used the brighter green here just so that we get a difference between the background and the stem. Just using my brush to wet the edge here. Again, don't spread the dark colour across everything. You want to rinse and dry your brush. And of course you can go onto a wet area like this for more colour strength. And again, just coming up with clean water. Just want to get that a little bit more shadowy and a bit less outliney. And I've kept things really simple and got a beautiful daisy flower. So I'd love to know in the comments if you're going to have a go at this tutorial, or perhaps there's some other tutorials that you would like me to make for you here on YouTube. I always appreciate your feedback. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It's completely free and cat approval is thrown in. And before you leave this video, don't forget to have a look in the video description. Any other videos that I've mentioned during this video will be linked down there. All free to watch, and what else is free are some downloadable PDFs, and there's even a free watercolor painting course that you can access, all listed in the description of this video. And if you enjoyed this video, I'm going to put up another one that I think you'll find very interesting. You can watch that video right now.